But you know what? There's nothing wrong with us. We're not broken, and we don't need to be fixed. We're all just trying to maintain, and we each got our own way of doing it.
In this video, I am going to take a closer look at the character, the guy, from the television show High Maintenance, and the ways that many of his decisions seem to be informed by avoidance coping. High Maintenance is a show that is centered on a cannabis dealer in New York City, while also profiling the lives of his customers who come from many different walks of life. Although much of the series is spent focused on auxiliary characters, we are presented with a fair amount of scenes which help us to understand the guy on a deeper level. While it is readily apparent that the guy has an issue with cannabis use, bordering on addiction, this problem seems to be correlated with issues of avoidance, which may be an underlying reason for his cannabis use. Everyone needs to find ways to cope with situations when presented with difficulties and hardships in their lives. Some coping strategies can be helpful, like using meditation or mindfulness, writing and journaling, or exercising. But many coping strategies can be unhelpful, in that instead of helping us to learn and overcome our challenges, we instead engage in activities which make it harder to approach these challenges the next time they arise. Avoidance coping is one form of unhealthy coping in which a person actively attempts to avoid unpleasant thoughts or situations in their lives, leading to more stress on a long-term basis. Through more careful examination, we can see the many ways that the guy's decision-making seems to be informed by avoidance coping. With this information in mind, let's get into the analysis. In Season 1, Episode 6, the guy goes over to his ex-wife Jules' place as he can't get into his apartment after being robbed. He is deservedly stressed out since he lost much of his stuff, including the keys for his apartment. Jules' new girlfriend is trying to have a relaxing night by herself, but the guy is overstaying his welcome. He yells and throws his phone at one point, and follows this by smoking his vape pen. Soon after, he gets upset about the rent being raised. We see how he has difficulty dealing with stress in his life, and cannabis seems to be the optimal way for him to deal with that stress. He later says,
I gotta get my shit together, man. I'm a mess.
He's speaking about his work as a pot dealer, but on a deeper level, he may be referring to his overall life. It seems he has an idea that some of the ways he is living may be unsustainable and that he needs to make changes. But when he gets into his apartment shortly after, instead of starting to make changes, he goes to the bar to meet a love interest. Despite his acknowledgement that some things need to change, he makes the decision to put it off for a little while longer. Avoidance coping, also known as avoidant coping, avoidance behaviors, and escape coping, is a maladaptive form of coping in which a person changes their behavior to avoid thinking about, feeling, or doing difficult things. In Season 2, Episode 1, the guy is with his new girlfriend Beth after a night of partying. They seem to be hungover and struggling to get out of bed. Soon after, they check their phones and read about the horrible news, a reference to Trump being elected in 2016. Neither of them take the news very well, and they immediately decide to light up the bong and start smoking. There is no attempt to process the news in a sober state of mind before needing to get high. The guy then mentions that,
I think I'm gonna go to work early.
The guy knows that many people will be wanting pot that day, and so going to work early will help him financially. But at the same time, he also knows that this will give him the opportunity to use cannabis even more, as he often smokes with customers throughout the day. This aspect of his job allows him to further disconnect from the reality of life and avoid whatever unpleasant thoughts may be coming up. In Season 2, Episode 4, the guy has been spending many hours with his new friend and Uber driver, Abdullah. They have been smoking weed constantly, and the guy admits that he feels overly stoned. Instead of taking caution with his actions and maybe getting a ride home, he leaves the Uber and gets on his bike, almost getting ran over by a car in the process. He could take this as an opportunity to reflect on things and find safer ways to go about his life. But in the very next episode, someone runs in front of him while he is biking, and he crashes his bike into a car, breaking his arm. We assume he was riding under the influence. He had the opportunity to address his recent mistake, but instead of tackling the problem head on, he continued with life as usual. In Season 2, Episode 5, the guy is in the hospital due to his biking accident. As he lays there for some time, he is needing to deal with uncomfortable feelings, partly due to the various conversations going on around him in which people are talking about different personal issues. He also seems to have difficulty dealing with boredom and not having anything to do. He's someone who is used to always doing something and being active, and so this pause is not normal for him. He decides to start vaping his weed pen and scrolling through his phone, two different types of avoidance behaviors. Later, his ex-wife comes to visit him at the hospital, and he's in a highly sedated state. He keeps mentioning wanting to smoke pot, and even though he's not fully aware of what he says, it provides an indication of how much cannabis rules his life. After she leaves, he's still smoking while laying in the bed. His eyes are bloodshot, and it seems the sedation is wearing off. Tears are coming out of his eyes, and we hear his heartbeat start to get louder. The process of coming down off sedation or any drug is often difficult and stressful, as one is needing to deal with things in a sober state of mind. It would be the opposite of avoidance to deal with the associated pain and learn a new way to cope, but instead, he requests to have more drugs provided. His continual need for sedation may be a reflection of how cannabis is a predominant part of his life and coping, in that the longer he goes without being sober, the harder it is to attempt to live life without cannabis. People find themselves using avoidance coping instead of facing stress head-on for many reasons. Anxious people can be susceptible to avoidance coping because initially it appears to be a way to avoid anxiety-provoking thoughts and situations. It is considered to be maladaptive or unhealthy because it often exacerbates stress without helping a person deal with the things that are causing them stress. In Season 2, Episode 6, the guy is coming down from a mushroom trip and is eating at a restaurant when an old friend approaches him in the bar. The friend talks about his personal successes and how he recently went to their college reunion, saying that he hadn't partied like that since college. The guy looks like he's uncomfortable, as the conversation is reflecting a lot about how his life is at current time. It reflects how things have not changed much for him over the years, how he has failed to progress. He goes home and meets with Abdullah, who has been covering the business while the guy was recovering from his injury. Abdullah thinks that they should continue working together and expand the business, explaining the many great ideas he has, but the guy is resistant. Although he has the potential to expand and be more successful, he says,
I know, but I just kind of like doing it on my own.
We might translate this as, I'm comfortable with how things are, and trying to change would be uncomfortable and difficult for me. Just before this scene, he had attempted to go speak with Beth, his ex-wife, but then decided against it. We are being provided several examples of his tendency towards stagnation or reverting to old ways of being, as opposed to making changes towards progress. Avoidance coping involves trying to avoid stressors rather than dealing with them. Avoiding stress might seem like a great way to become less stressed, but this isn't necessarily the case. More often than not, confronting a problem or dealing with a stressor is the only way to effectively reduce the stress it causes. In Season 2, Episode 8, the guy is making a delivery and is pulled into a situation with an old man who needs help. We slowly learn that this man is living by himself, and we see that the apartment is in very poor shape. The man has vision problems and seems fairly disoriented to time and place. He then asks the guy to check if his sink is working, and the guy sees roaches all over but declines to say anything. It's possible this man has a severe disorder like dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and he may be giving other people money unnecessarily or being financially abused. After several attempts, the guy finally leaves the apartment, and we see from his expression that he knows something is wrong and that perhaps he should take action. He could inform the police or adult protective services so that someone can get involved and make sure this guy is living safely to ensure his continued well-being. But the guy once again avoids things which make him uncomfortable and leaves without doing anything. The most he can do is shake his head in frustration. When you become comfortable being uncomfortable, you will be better able to deal with your feelings and the stressors that cause them. When you can sit with these hard feelings, you'll have more choices about how you want to face the problem because you won't have a knee-jerk avoidance response. Once you become more used to it, facing your problems head-on won't bring you as much anxiety. Some people find that meditation helps them get into a place where they can be comfortable with the uncomfortable. In Season 3, Episode 7, the guy and his new girlfriend Lee seem to be annoying each other and running into relationship problems after being together since the start of the season. There seems to be some passive aggressiveness occurring between them, a sign that they have some disagreements and issues that they have chosen not to address directly. Later in the night, Lee says she wants to leave the party early, and the guy is obviously not okay with that. But instead of talking about it, he ignores it and says he's fine leaving. When trying to start the car, the engine won't start. He seems to become frustrated with the car, but really, it's because he hasn't expressed his frustrations about the relationship. On the taxi ride home, Lee seems to be struggling emotionally due to her own personal stress. Things are not going well for either of them, but rather than talk about it, we see the guy biting his fingernails and looking out the window. It's easier to avoid the confrontation, even though talking about it and working through the issues may lead to an improved relationship. Lee does not appear in the show again, so we assume they break up after this night. In Season 3, Episode 9, the guy is speaking with an old friend who just had a baby. He talks about how they used to be best friends when they were younger, but that they grew far apart over the years. It's an uncomfortable conversation for him to have, but he's actively trying to confront past issues and get to the bottom of things. As they talk more, we find out that the guy had a certain thought in his head for the past 20 years about why they had grown apart. When he presents this idea to his friend, she laughs about how ridiculous an idea it is, and then they get to a real understanding of why they grew apart. The guy was once again engaging in avoidance in the form of rumination, another unhealthy coping mechanism in which one fixates thoughts on a past event without making attempts to resolve the cause of the thought. The two of them clear things up and improve their relationship, but this also could have happened long ago if avoidance wasn't such a large factor in the guy's life. If you avoid having the conversations that are necessary to resolve a conflict in the early stages, it can snowball and bring greater levels of stress to the relationship. In some cases, unresolved conflict might even end a relationship. If this happens, you might develop anxiety over any type of conflict, as your experience might have made you believe that even a small conflict can end a relationship, which might be true if a conflict was not resolved. If you find yourself ending relationships rather than working through conflicts, you will likely end up with many broken relationships and a sense that you are not able to make relationships work in the long term. In Season 4, Episode 9, the guy is spending Hanukkah at his home with his niece as they are snowed in. They are talking about their family and how she thinks she inherited mental illness as a gene within their family. The guy mentions that their family is very judgmental and that he lied to them for many years about working at Vimeo so that he wouldn't be judged. As he says these words, he begins to get his weed ready to smoke. This scene provides a better idea of where some of the avoidant behavior has come from for the guy. His family had never given him the opportunity to be himself and to be open about issues in life due to their judgmental nature, so he had learned to avoid things and not address them, with cannabis being a primary tool for this process. This appears to be an explanation for many of the behaviors discussed in this video. He proceeds to say,
We're all just trying to maintain, and we each got our own way of doing it.
She nods her head as he rolls his joint. Later in the episode, he is speaking with his friend and tells him he doesn't want to return home with his niece for the holidays. The next day, he decides not to go and instead decides to go to New Zealand by himself. Perhaps this act can be seen as the guy doing what is good for him, as him living his best life. But based on the other examples we have examined, we can instead see this as a further avoidance of stressful or anxiety-provoking situations in his life. He gets to go on a great trip to New Zealand, but at the same time, he is making it harder for himself to confront the anxieties that come from his family situation. He is free once again to do what he wants, but there is no learning or growth that is occurring in his life, no attempts to change. It seems that for the guy, whichever route provides the least resistance is the way to go, whereas the difficult path is constantly left uncharted. This concludes this video on the psychology of high maintenance. Please watch my other videos regarding other TV and film characters if you enjoyed this one. Thank you for watching.